It is the early 70s in Brownsville, New York, more war zone than neighbourhood. The buildings stood like burnt-out teeth, blackened and broken, their windows punched out by poverty and rage. The sidewalks weren't made for strolling. They were battlegrounds, every block a front line between survival and surrender. The nights were loud, not with music but with screaming. Police radios crackling, babies wailing, a couple fighting on the third floor while someone overdosed in the stairwell below. And sometimes you didn't hear a damn thing. And that silence, that was worse. Because silence in Brownsville meant a body cooling somewhere, behind a dumpster, under a stairwell, slumped in a hallway where the lights never worked. The hallways of those tenements were long, dark veins, pulsing through the heart of a dying borough. Women lit cigarettes with shaking hands, children curled in corners, learning fast what it meant to stay invisible. No father, no safe place, just noise and pressure and the deep aching knowledge that you were born behind the 8 ball and no one was coming to save you. And in the middle of it all, a child opened his eyes. He didn't cry, he watched. He watched the hookers with swollen lips and runny mascara dragging themselves home at dawn. He watched the crackheads fall apart like ghost stories no one wanted to hear. He watched the dealers and the beat cops and the beatdowns, taking notes in silence, learning the law of the jungle before he could even spell his own name. His world was hunger and fists and shame. His lullabies were sirens and slammed doors and the sound of someone getting stomped 2 floors down. And when he walked through the streets, they didn't part for him. Not yet. He was just another skinny kid with hand-me-down shoes and fury smouldering beneath his ribs. But that fury, it wasn't ordinary. It had shape. It had teeth. There, under the shattered windows and rusted fire escapes, in the gutters where dreams bled out and died, something ancient stirred. A storm was forming in that boy's chest, the kind of storm you don't survive. You either become it or get torn apart by it. His mother, Lorna Mae Tyson, struggled to raise her children, alone after Mike's biological father, Purcell Tyson, vanished from the picture. In truth, the man Mike thought of as his father was a pimp and small-time criminal named Jimmy Kirkpatrick, and he, too, disappeared early in Mike's life. That left Lorna to raise Mike and his older siblings in Brownsville, Brooklyn, a place where the skyline was just broken buildings, and hope was mostly a rumour. Brownsville in the late 60s and 70s was a storm of violence, addiction and neglect. Tenement housing, broken glass, cold winters with no heating, and street corners ruled by hustlers and gangbangers. Mike was soft-spoken, overweight and painfully shy. That made him a magnet for bullies. They stripped him of his clothes, punched him for sport, and mocked his lisp and high voice. His older brother Rodney sometimes stood up for him, but most of the time Mike suffered in silence. Until he found his birds. Pigeons became his secret world. They didn't judge, they didn't hit, they didn't mock him. They circled in the sky like spirits, gliding over the broken streets he trudged through. He found comfort in their soft coos, the flap of their wings, the quiet trust between boy and bird. He learned about pigeons from a local kid named Angelo, who introduced him to the rooftop coops and the delicate art of flying. For once, something responded to his gentleness. He could love without fear, but everything beautiful in Mike's world got tainted. One of the regular tormentors took the head one of Mike's pigeons. He didn't just kill it, he ripped its head off and laughed. Something in Mike broke. He snapped. He fought back, really fought back for the first time. Fists flailing, teeth bared. That boy didn't get back up easily, and Mike didn't stop. Standing over the beaten bully, spitting teeth and blood, Mike for the first time tasted power. Violence, he learned, could be a language, a shield, a sword. The same streets that once swallowed him whole started whispering something else, fear, and it felt like something close to respect. From there, he started running with gangs, committing robberies and getting arrested dozens of times by the time he was 13. But in the back of his mind, he still flew pigeons, still visited coops, still looked up at the sky. That contradiction, savage rage and childlike tenderness, that would remain a constant throughout Mike's life. Brooklyn, 1978. It started with a coat, not a flashy one, just enough shine and swagger for a 12-year-old kid to think, that should be mine. The boy wearing it had money, probably soft, probably never been punched in the mouth before. Mike followed him. No plan, just instinct. Down the avenue, past the fried chicken spot, under the graffiti-blasted awning of an abandoned building. Then he made his move. Quick hands, faster feet. The kid resisted, shouted, but Mike hit him hard, panic fueling his fists, and ran with the coat. He didn't make it far. 2 plainclothes cops jumped him near Livonia Avenue. He was cuffed, thrown into the back of the cruiser, the coat still clutched in his shaking hands. It wasn't his first arrest, but this time it stuck. The judge didn't want to hear about his mother working herself to death, about food stamps, about pigeons and loneliness. He just saw another black kid from Brownsville with fists like weapons and eyes full of silence. Mike was going away, not by choice, but bad decisions made by another young black kid in Brooklyn, Johnstown, upstate New York. It wasn't a school, it was a prison dressed in a cheap education system. Miles away from the city, surrounded by icy woods and grey hills. No subway rumbles, no corner bodegas, just razor wire and routine. The air smelled like bleach and steel. The staff didn't care who you were, just that you obeyed. Mike kept his head low, but the anger boiled. Other boys sensed it. Some tried to test him, shoves in the hallway, whispered threats in the dorm. He gave them violence, quick and brutal, and they left him alone. But even in Tryon there were ghosts. At night the cries of kids too scared to sleep, the muffled sobs of a boy who had never had the guiding hand of a parent. The stink of disinfectant barely masked the scent of hopelessness. Then came Cus, not in person, not yet, but through Bobby Stewart, a counsellor and former boxer who noticed something raw and volcanic in Mike's fists. One day, Bobby brought gloves, pads and a mirror. "Hit it," he said. Mike did, and something clicked. The rage was still there, but it found rhythm, control, power. The boy who'd broken bones over pigeon feathers was now breaking pads with the kind of force that made grown men pause. He trained him in secret, then told Cus, "You need to see this kid." And with that, the course changed. Tryon was no longer a dead end. It became a tunnel, a dark, ugly tunnel that led to something waiting just beyond the mist. A ring, a purpose, a man in the shadows who believed in warriors, destiny and fear. And Mike, for the first time in his life, he was listening. The old man lived like a ghost, tucked upstate in the sleepy town of Catskill, in a peeling white house that smelled of old books, medicine, and something fainter, something sacred, like sweat soaked into floorboards from 100,000 jabs thrown in silence. The place had the weight of memory, a quiet storm behind every creaking door. He wasn't just a trainer, he was a relic, a prophet in exile. By the time Mike cast a shadow at his door, a raw, wild-eyed boy from the pit, Cus had already carved legends out of rough marble. He'd made Floyd Patterson the youngest heavyweight champion in history, trained Jose Torres to a light heavyweight world title. He'd taught them all about fear, about control, about becoming. But Cus had been burned by boxing politics, driven from the bright lights of New York by corruption, by men with fat rings and thin souls. So he disappeared, took his ideas, his philosophies, his gospel, and built a little sanctuary in Catskill. The gym, it sat like a dusty chapel above the police station. The paint peeled from the walls in long strips like old bandages. The heavy bags were patched with duct tape and sweat, sagging like old fighters. There was no glamour, just cold concrete, battered gloves, and the faint hum of a broken fluorescent light. But inside those 4 ropes, Cus preached war. He quoted Plato, Sun Tzu, Machiavelli. He made boys into machines not by strength, but by thought. This was the environment that the boy spat from the gutters of Brownsville. 13 years old, thick-necked, barely literate. Already a thief, already dangerous, arrived in. But Cus didn't see the crime, the fear, the broken pieces. He saw fire. He said it later. Said, "This is the heavyweight champion of the world." Not maybe, not someday. Is. No one believed him. Cus took him in, made him part of the family. Mike lived in his house, slept under the same roof, learned how to fold his clothes, say please and thank you. Cus became the father and the general Mike needed. Discipline by day, stories of warriors by night. Cus didn't care with softness. He cared with purpose. He woke Mike before sunrise, ran him through drills that broke older boys. He made him memorize affirmations, drilled philosophy into his skull like scripture. The hero and the coward feel the same thing, but the hero uses his fear, controls it. Discipline is doing what you hate, but doing it like you love it. He told Mike he was special, not like a gifted kid, like a chosen weapon. And Mike, hungry for love, for order, for a name, believed him. He bled for him, trained like a madman, watched old fight films while other kids chased girls, lived for the sound of Cus' voice saying, "Good, again, now faster." The old man, half blind, shuffling between the ring and his recliner, was building something monstrous out of pain and precision. And in that crumbling gym above a police station, the scariest fighter of the modern era was forged in silence. It began every morning before the sun even dared open its eyes. No alarms, no leniency, just the voice of Cus, rasping through the cracked hallway like a general in a war he refused to lose. Up, let's go. No warmth, no room to whine. Mike would rub the sleep from his eyes and crawl out from the warmth of his small bed, legs sore, lungs still aching from yesterday's sprints. But there was no room for tired, no space for softness, because this wasn't training, this was indoctrination, discipline as religion. They ran 5 miles in the cold Catskill air, lungs cutting on the frost. The streets were empty, except for that lonely sound of footsteps and the occasional barking dog. Mike learned to breathe through pain, to count lampposts instead of minutes. Sometimes Cus followed in his car, headlights trailing like a watchful ghost. Faster. Breathe. Let pain be your compass. The difference between the great and the good is how they suffer. By the time school started, Mike had already shed more sweat than most men spilled in a day. And then, after school, the real war began. The gym again, the tape again, the endless rounds of shadow boxing, the bag work, the drills, the repetitions. Footwork so tight it could fit on a dime, head movement like a pendulum of violence. Cus didn't tolerate mistakes. He didn't tolerate wasted movement. He wanted a machine. There were no shortcuts, no mercy, no good enough. He taught Mike to watch the old fight reels of Dempsey, Lewis, Patterson, over and over, until he could mimic every twitch of muscle. He made him memorize speeches, lessons, manifestos. Cus believed in programming the mind just as much as training the body. Your mind is your best weapon. If you don't control it, it controls you. You don't fight a man, you fight his will. Discipline wasn't the goal, it was the price of greatness. And Mike, broken down and rebuilt from the bones up, began to believe. He became a monk in gloves, a storm with a pulse. Every second of his life was controlled. Food, speech, sleep. Cus inspected his shoes, his sheets, his notebooks. He told him how to walk, how to enter a room, how to stare at opponents and make them fold before the bell even rang. They trained in silence. They studied in whispers. And if Mike cried, Cus would watch, impassive. The crying's good. You're breaking through. The most dangerous man is the one who already died in training. But it wasn't just technique, it was dogma. Cus filled him with a belief system. That fear, was an illusion. That emotion was weakness. That he had been chosen for one purpose, to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. And Mike, this boy from Brownsville, this hurricane in sneakers, believed him. He believed like a disciple. Because in a world that had only ever hurt him, Cus gave him something holy, a reason, a path, and gloves with destiny sewn into the stitching. In the fading autumn of '85, as the cold began to creep through the windows of the Catskill house, a quiet settled in that no one dared to name. The fire that had burned so fiercely in Cus's chest for decades, his belief in destiny, in discipline, in building men out of broken boys, had finally dimmed. The old man passed away in a Manhattan hospital bed, leaving behind a world he had tried to bend to his will through sheer force of vision. But he also left behind a boy, a fighter, his unfinished symphony. Mike Tyson didn't cry when he heard the news. He didn't collapse, scream, or wail. He just went quiet. That thick silence that only comes when the world drops out from under your feet. For Mike, Cus wasn't just a coach. He wasn't even just a father figure. Cus was everything. He was the first man to look past the mugshots and juvenile records, to ignore the fists and the fury, and see instead a champion buried inside a scared, abandoned child. And now he was gone. The house that had once been a sanctuary, filled with the rhythms of shadow boxing, the scuff of footwork drills, and Cus's relentless philosophical monologues, was now still. The halls echoed. The gym downstairs, once full of barked instructions and the thud of leather on canvas, felt more like a mausoleum than a dojo. Kevin Rooney tried to keep the machinery running. He doubled down on the training, kept the days tightly structured, but it wasn't the same, because without Cus, there was no compass, no guiding star. But Tyson wasn't lost. Not exactly. If anything, he became even more focused, because now every jab, every body shot, every left hook wasn't just about climbing rankings. It was about legacy. It was about fulfilling a promise. Cus had made a prophecy. This kid is going to be the youngest heavyweight champion in the history of boxing. And that sentence had been repeated so many times it had become something sacred, an oath Tyson carried in his bones. Over the next year, Mike began dismantling the heavyweight division with the cold precision of a man possessed. The media dubbed him Iron Mike. Nothing fancy, just a stripped-down fighter with prehistoric power and a predator's instincts. But beneath the headlines, behind the knockouts and the highlight reels, there was something deeper. Grief, shaped into a weapon. Mike wasn't just knocking men out. He was exercising ghosts. There was no swagger, no trash talk, just business. He rose through the ranks like a wrecking ball, laying waste to seasoned veterans and rising stars alike. 22 wins, no losses. Most didn't last past the third round. Some barely lasted past the first. And then came the announcement, Trevor Berbick, the WBC heavyweight champion. A tough Jamaican fighter known for his brawling style and his claim to fame, beating an aging Muhammad Ali in Ali's final fight. But what the public didn't know, and what history rarely mentions, is that Ali had already chosen his revenge. Not for himself, but through the hands of a young prodigy named Mike Tyson. In the ring seconds before the bell, Ali leans into Tyson. Get him. Tyson nods. Because Berbick wasn't just another opponent, he was a symbol, a final test before destiny could be fulfilled. Before the bell rang, before the world watched a 19-year-old step into history, came the boy. It wasn't just Mike Tyson, it was the spirit of Cus. It was every beating, every arrest, every broken rib, every pigeon lost. It was pain, forged into purpose, and it was about to be unleashed. Ali. The legend, older now, slower, but still carrying the weight of the sport in his eyes, stepped through the ropes, not to fight, just to be there. His presence was symbolic, a closing chapter, a handoff. He had been in the ring with Trevor Berbick once, a fight that should never have happened, a final performance that ended not with thunder, but with silence. Berbick had won that night, won by beating a god on tired legs. Now the god stood outside the ring, and the man who would avenge him, just 19 years old, stood pacing like a beast behind bars. Mike Tyson, shirt off, gloves on, no robes, no gimmicks, just raw, terrifying intent. He didn't sit in the corner, he didn't relax. He stalked, back and forth, back and forth. His neck twitched like a coiled spring. He kept looking at Berbick, daring him, asking, with his eyes, "Are you ready to die for that belt?" And Berbick, he looked, just for a second, a flicker, a glance, and that was it. Tyson saw it. That moment, the crack in the armour, the wobble in belief, it was all he needed. The bell rang. Round one. Berbick came forward with a kind of loose arrogance, his usual brawling, pressuring style, but it had no teeth. His jab, meant to measure distance, was snatched out of the air by Tyson's head movement. Side to side, bobbing low, just as Cus had drilled into his bones for years. Every movement was economy, purpose, fury under control. Then bam! Tyson exploded with a right to the body, then an uppercut that grazed Berbick's chin like a warning shot. The champ stumbled, eyes wide. That wasn't supposed to happen. Berbick tried to clinch, tried to lean on him, bully him. Tyson didn't budge. He fought like gravity, pulling everything downward. A minute in, Berbick had tasted more leather than a man should in 3 rounds. And it kept coming. Hooks off angles Berbick couldn't see. Every time he blinked, Tyson was inside, tearing at the foundation. End of the round. Berbick was bleeding from the mouth, his balance already deserting him. The crowd buzzed. Commentators stammered. Tyson didn't blink. No joy, no mercy, just the mission. Round 2. Berbick came out slower, a brawler trying to box, his legs no longer connected to his heart. He flicked a jab. Tyson slipped, then stepped in and detonated a left hook from hell. Berbick went down, he got up, but he was no longer in this world. His eyes rolled like marbles, his limbs rebellious. He stood, then swayed, then dropped again, and again. A man trying to rise, like a puppet with broken strings. The ref waved it off. 2 minutes and 35 seconds into the second round. Mike Tyson, undisputed, the youngest heavyweight champion in the history of boxing, just like Cus said. They handed him the green WBC belt, and he didn't even smile. No triumphant leap, no celebration, just a slow breath, as if to say, "There, I did it." And Berbick, he sat in the corner, draped in towels and disbelief. He had never been hit like that. He had never felt so small. His rugged style, smothering, aggressive, had collapsed under the precision of Tyson's storm. There was no space, no safety, just power. In the end, Trevor Berbick wasn't beaten. He was erased. Because that night wasn't about defence or belts. It was about prophecy. About a kid who should have died in Brownsville. A kid who made pain his companion and turned rage into art. A kid who lost his mentor and in doing so found his mission. Mike Tyson didn't take the belt. He claimed it, like it was always his.